A dying puppy crawls to a veterinary clinic begging for help. But what the vet did next sparked a chain of events no one could have predicted. Late one stormy night, a lone vet finds a battered, near-dead puppy clawing his way to her clinic door. She breaks every rule to save him. But by morning, a chilling note appears. "He wasn't supposed to survive. Now you'll wish he hadn't." What was meant to be an act of mercy turns into a waking nightmare. Strange figures begin circling her clinic. Her reputation is suddenly under fire, and the scars on the puppy's body, they tell a story no one wants to hear. The deeper she digs, the more she realizes this wasn't just a case of abuse, it's a warning. Someone powerful wants her silent. But why? What secret was this tiny animal never supposed to bring to light? As her world unravels, one question hangs in the air. What did she just save? And what will it cost her? Before we begin, share a piece of your world in the comments. Your city, your energy. It's a powerful thing, being part of something bigger than ourselves. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Dr. Leanne Rowe finished updating her last patient chart of the day. Her small veterinary clinic in rural Georgia had seen better days, with its worn linoleum floors and dated equipment. But it was home. She glanced at the clock on the wall, 8:30 in the evening. Another long day was finally winding down. "Good night, Dr. Rowe," called Jenny, her assistant, from the front desk. "Don't stay too late again." Leanne managed a tired smile. "Just finishing up. You head on home to your family." As the front door clicked shut behind Jenny, silence settled over the clinic. Leanne felt the familiar weight of loneliness press down on her shoulders. The empty building seemed to echo with memories she'd rather forget. Of her bustling Atlanta practice, of Thomas, of everything she'd left behind. She was just gathering her things when she heard it, a faint scratching sound coming from outside the back door. At first she thought it might be a branch scraping against the building, but then she heard a weak whimper. Leanne's heart jumped. She rushed to the door and pulled it open. There, collapsed on the concrete step, was a small puppy. Her breath caught in her throat. The poor creature was in terrible shape, its golden fur matted with blood and dirt, one leg clearly broken, barely breathing. Without hesitation, Leanne scooped up the tiny body. It was as light as a feather and trembling violently. As she cradled it close, the puppy's eyes fluttered open for just a moment. Something in that desperate gaze struck her like a physical blow, a look of pure trust and hope that reminded her so much of why she'd become a vet in the first place. The sound of a car door made her jump. Jenny was hurrying back across the parking lot. "I forgot my phone," Jenny called out, then stopped short when she saw what Leanne was holding. "Oh no, Dr. Rowe, we can't." "He's dying, Jenny," Leanne said, already carrying the puppy inside to the examination room. "I have to help him." Jenny followed, wringing her hands. "But the new regulations, we're already under scrutiny from the state board. Taking in an undocumented stray could cost us our license?" Leanne was already gathering supplies, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. "I know the risks." She attached a pulse monitor to the puppy's paw. The readings were dangerously weak. "But I won't let him die just because of some bureaucratic rule." "Dr. Rowe, please," Jenny pleaded. "Think about what happened in Atlanta. We can't afford any attention right now." Leanne's hands stilled for a moment as unwanted memories surfaced. Thomas's passionate voice as he exposed the pharmaceutical company's cruel animal testing, the threatening phone calls that followed, the night she lost everything. She pushed the thoughts away and focused on the tiny life before her. "This is different," she said firmly, preparing an IV line. "This isn't about exposing corruption or fighting the system. This is about saving one innocent life that found its way to our door." The puppy's breathing was growing more labored. Leanne did a quick assessment. Broken leg, internal bleeding, severe dehydration. He needed surgery immediately. Jenny stood in the doorway, conflict clear on her face. Finally, she sighed and began washing her hands. "What do you need me to do?" Relief flooded through Leanne. "Thank you. Let's start with pain medication and fluids while I prep for surgery." For the next 2 hours, they worked to save the puppy's life. The surgery was delicate, requiring all of Leanne's skill and concentration. As she worked, she found herself talking softly to the unconscious animal. "You're going to make it, little one. I promise." She thought about the ash-gray streaks in his golden fur. "I think I'll call you Ash. You're a fighter, Ash." Finally, in the early hours of the morning, the puppy's vital signs stabilized. Leanne sat back, exhausted but satisfied. Ash was sleeping peacefully under a warming blanket, his tiny chest rising and falling steadily. Jenny touched her shoulder. "You did it. But what happens now?" Leanne looked at the sleeping puppy, at the careful stitches and bandages that marked her handiwork. She thought about the rules she'd broken, the risks she'd taken. But when Ash's paw twitched in his sleep, and a soft puppy sigh escaped him, she knew she'd made the right choice. "Now," she said quietly, "we give him a chance at life. Whatever comes next, we'll deal with it." She reached out to gently stroke Ash's fur, and his tail gave the slightest wag in response. In that moment, the loneliness that had been her constant companion seemed to lift just a little. Sometimes, she realized, the most important choices weren't about following rules. They were about following your heart. The morning sun cast long shadows through the clinic's windows as Leanne arrived early to check on Ash. Her steps echoed in the empty hallway as she made her way to the recovery area. The tiny puppy was curled up in his blanket, his chest rising and falling steadily. When he heard her approach, his tail gave a weak thump against the padding. "Good morning, little fighter," she said softly, reaching in to check his vital signs. His temperature was normal, and the surgical site looked clean. It was almost miraculous how well he'd pulled through the night. The sound of Jenny's car pulling into the parking lot drew her attention. But instead of coming inside, her assistant knocked urgently on the window, gesturing for Leanne to come to the front door. "What's wrong?" Leanne asked as she stepped outside. Jenny's face was pale as she pointed to something taped to the door. Leanne's blood ran cold. There, secured with clear tape, was a plain white envelope. Above it, a handwritten note made her stomach clench. "He wasn't supposed to survive. Now you'll wish he hadn't." With trembling fingers, she pulled the envelope free. Inside were stacks of crisp $100 bills. She counted quickly. $3,000 in total. "We need to call the police," Jenny whispered, but Leanne shook her head. "Not yet." She thought of Thomas, of how quickly things had spiraled out of control in Atlanta when they'd gone to the authorities. "First, we need to understand what we're dealing with." Back inside, Leanne examined Ash more carefully. In the bright morning light, she noticed things she'd missed during the emergency surgery. There were strange marks under his fur, old burns in a deliberate pattern, and what looked like crude tattoos on his inner thigh. "These weren't accidents," she murmured, documenting everything with her phone's camera. "Someone did this to him deliberately." She called Mike Davidson, the local animal control officer she'd known since moving to Pine Hollow. He arrived within the hour, his usually cheerful face serious as he studied the photos. "This reminds me of something," he said, frowning at the images. "We had a case last month, complaints about animals being hurt at the old Carter farm. Questioned a farmhand about it, fellow named Denny Cauldron." Leanne felt a chill run down her spine. "What happened?" "That's the thing." Mike scratched his head. "Guy just disappeared afterward, left all his stuff behind, didn't even pick up his last paycheck. The whole thing felt wrong, but we couldn't prove anything." He looked at Ash, who was sleeping fitfully. "Those marks, though, they're similar to what we found in that case, like someone was experimenting." Leanne thought of the threatening note. Could this Cauldron person have been part of something bigger? Maybe. Mike's voice was grim. But be careful, Leanne. The Carter farm has powerful connections in this county, and after what happened with Cauldron, he trailed off meaningfully. Jenny, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. Dr. Rowe, maybe we should just let this go. We could find Ash a good home, somewhere far from here. But Leanne looked at the sleeping puppy, at the cruel marks marring his small body, and felt the same fierce determination that had gotten her into trouble in Atlanta. Number whatever's going on, Ash is evidence now, and someone's clearly worried about what he might lead us to. She picked up the envelope of money and handed it to Mike. Take this, document it, but keep it quiet for now. No official reports yet. I need time to figure out what we're dealing with. After Mike left, Leanne sat beside Ash's cage, gently stroking his fur as he slept. The puppy pressed his head against her hand, seeking comfort. The trust in that simple gesture made her heart ache. "What happened to you?" she whispered. "And what am I getting myself into?" Jenny touched her shoulder. "You're not alone this time, Dr. Rowe. Whatever this is, we'll face it together." Leanne nodded, grateful for the support, but her mind was already racing. The threatening note made it clear. Saving Ash hadn't just been about breaking clinic rules. She'd stumbled onto something darker, something people were willing to kill to keep hidden. And now, like it or not, she was a target. She looked down at Ash, remembering how close he'd come to death the night before. Someone had wanted him dead, had expected him to die. Instead, he'd found his way to her door, and in saving him, she'd put them both in danger. The morning sun caught the silver strands in her hair as she straightened her shoulders. She'd run away once before, after losing Thomas. But not this time. This time, she would stand her ground and fight. For Ash, and for all the other voiceless victims who couldn't fight for themselves. Over the next few days, Ash's strength slowly returned. Each morning, Leanne found him a little more alert, his tail wagging with growing enthusiasm when she approached his cage. But as his condition improved, the evidence of his past abuse became clearer, turning her stomach with each new discovery. "Look at this," she said to Jenny one morning, carefully parting Ash's fur to reveal a pattern of old scars. "These weren't random accidents. Someone did this systematically." Jenny leaned in closer, her face pinched with concern. "Those look like fighting wounds." Leanne nodded grimly. During her routine examination, her fingers brushed against something hard beneath Ash's skin near his shoulder blade. "Wait a minute." She grabbed her handheld scanner, running it over the area. The device beeped, displaying a series of numbers. "A microchip?" Jenny's eyes widened. "I thought you said he was undocumented." He was. Leanne's fingers flew across her computer keyboard, accessing the National Pet Registry database. When the results appeared, she sat back in her chair, her heart pounding. This can't be right. The chip was registered to an address she recognized, the sprawling Bourne estate on the outskirts of town. Councilman Grant Bourne's private property. "The Bourne estate?" Jenny whispered, reading over her shoulder. "But they're the most powerful family in Pine Hollow," Leanne finished. She'd seen Councilman Bourne at town meetings, always impeccably dressed in expensive suits, his southern charm masking something cold in his eyes that had always made her uneasy. She pulled up local news articles, scanning headlines until one caught her eye. "Search continues for missing teen. Riley Bourne last seen 4 days ago." The councilman's 16-year-old son had vanished without a trace. The article mentioned he was last seen heading toward the family's private grounds. "Dr. Rowe," Jenny said carefully, "what exactly are you thinking?" Leanne stared at Ash, who was watching them with those intelligent eyes that had first drawn her in. "The timing's too convenient. Riley disappears, And days later, this puppy shows up at our door nearly dead with a chip registered to the Bourne estate? She pulled up satellite images of the Bourne property. Hundreds of acres of private land, multiple outbuildings, and a separate entrance road that bypassed the main gates. Perfect setup for something illegal. Dogfighting, maybe, or breeding for fighting dogs. That's a serious accusation, Jenny warned. The Bournes practically own this town. I know. Leanne remembered the threatening note. The money. That's why we need to be careful. Call Mike from Animal Control. Tell him what we found, but ask him to keep it unofficial for now. While Jenny made the call, Leanne walked the perimeter of the clinic, noting vulnerable points. She'd already installed new security cameras after the threatening note, but now she added extra locks to the windows and back door. Later that afternoon, she drove past the Bourne estate, keeping her distance. The iron gates were closed, with private security posted at the entrance. A sign warned against trespassing, citing local ordinances that Bourne himself had probably written. At the local diner, she carefully brought up Riley's disappearance to Sarah, the chatty waitress who knew everyone's business. Such a shame about that boy, Sarah said, refilling Leanne's coffee. His daddy's got half the state police looking for him. Thing is, she lowered her voice. Riley had been acting strange lately. Overheard him arguing with his father right here in the diner last week. Something about the back acres of their property being off limits. Leanne's hand tightened around her coffee cup. Did anyone hear what they were arguing about specifically? Sarah shook her head. But Riley stormed out, saying he was going to expose everything. Next thing we know, he's gone. Back at the clinic, Leanne found Mike waiting with Jenny. His face was grave as he examined the evidence they'd gathered. This matches patterns we've seen before, he said, pointing to Ash's scars. Similar marks were found on dogs in that case with Denny Cauldron, but we could never prove where they came from. And now Cauldron's missing too, Leanne said quietly. Mike nodded. Just like Riley Bourne. Listen, Leanne, be careful. That microchip gives us probable cause, but Bourne's got judges in his pocket. One phone call from him, and any investigation gets shut down. So what do we do? Keep documenting everything. I'll start quiet inquiries, see if other clinics have treated similar cases. But he hesitated. You should consider getting a gun permit, if Bourne's behind this and he thinks you're a threat. I understand. Leanne thought of Thomas, how quickly violence had followed their discoveries in Atlanta. She wouldn't make the same mistakes again. This time, she'd be prepared. After Mike left, she sat with Ash, who rested his head on her lap. The puppy had survived against impossible odds, finding his way to her door that night. Now he might be the key to uncovering whatever dark operations Councilman Bourne was hiding on his estate. Operations that might have cost his own son's life. She scratched behind Ash's ears, feeling the trust in his gentle pressure against her hand. We'll figure this out, she promised softly. Whatever's happening on that estate, we'll find the truth. Leanne sat in her office, staring at Noah Trevor's phone number. Her contact at Animal Control had recommended him, describing him as someone who gets results when the system fails. After 3 rings, a gruff voice answered. Trevor's here. Mr. Travers, I'm Dr. Leanne Rowe from Pine Hollow Veterinary Clinic. Mike Davidson suggested I call you about a sensitive situation. There was a pause. Mike's good people. What's the problem? Leanne explained about Ash, the microchip, and her suspicions about the Bourne estate. When she finished, Noah's response was measured. You're talking about Grant Bourne? The councilman? His tone carried a weight of skepticism. That's a dangerous road, Dr. Rowe. I know, but I have evidence. Evidence gets buried. Trust me, I learned that lesson the hard way. She heard bitterness in his voice. Lost my badge trying to expose corruption in my department. Sometimes the bad guys win. And sometimes they don't, Leanne countered. But only if people stand up to them. Please, just come see what I've found. The next morning, Noah arrived at the clinic. He looked exactly like his voice suggested, weathered and world-weary, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Leanne led him to Ash's kennel. "Here's our witness," she said softly. Ash, who usually shied away from strangers, approached the kennel door, sniffing Noah's extended hand. "He's been through hell," Noah observed, noting the healing wounds. His expression changed as he examined the documented evidence, photos, medical records, and the microchip information. "These marking patterns," he said, pointing to specific scars. "I've seen them before. Professional dogfighting operations use similar training methods." He looked up at Leanne. "You said Riley Bourne disappeared after arguing with his father about the back acres?" Leanne nodded. "And Denny Cauldron vanished right after being questioned about animal cruelty." Noah's skepticism began to crack. The Bourne estate has private roads, security systems, and enough land to hide whatever they want. He straightened up. "I've got surveillance equipment. If there's an operation running, we'll find it." That night, they parked Noah's unmarked van on public land bordering the Bourne estate. Using thermal imaging cameras and long-range lenses, they documented activity around the outlying buildings. "There," Noah whispered, adjusting the focus. "That structure near the tree line, regular movement patterns consistent with kennel operations." Through the camera, Leanne saw shadowy figures moving between buildings. Cages were visible through gaps in the walls, and she could make out the shapes of dogs being transferred between enclosures. "Wait," Noah said, zooming in on a particular section. "Look at the ground there." Fresh dirt had been recently turned over in several spots, roughly the size of shallow graves. They conducted surveillance over the next 3 nights, building a comprehensive record. Noah's experience helped them identify patterns: delivery trucks arriving at odd hours, suspicious movements of personnel, and the unmistakable sounds of animals in distress carrying through the night air. Between surveillance shifts, Leanne spent time with Ash. His recovery was remarkable. He now wagged his tail at her approach and had started playing with toys. But he still trembled at sudden movements and wouldn't let anyone touch his back legs. "You're safe now," she assured him during their quiet moments together. "No one's going to hurt you again." One evening, Noah arrived with a grim expression. "I've been making calls to other investigators. Bourne's estate matches a pattern we've been tracking. High-end dogfighting operations catering to wealthy clients. They breed champions, train them brutally, and dispose of the ones that don't make the cut." "Like they tried to do with Ash," Leanne said quietly. "Exactly. But here's the thing. These operations usually have inside protection. Politicians, law enforcement, judges. It explains why previous investigations hit dead ends." Leanne thought of Thomas, who had died trying to expose similar corruption in Atlanta. But this time felt different. She wasn't alone. "We have solid evidence now," she said. "The microchip, the surveillance footage, medical records." Noah nodded. "Enough to force an official investigation if we can get it to the right people." He hesitated. "But Bourne will know someone's watching. You should consider—" "I'm not backing down," Leanne interrupted. "Whatever happens, I'm seeing this through." Their eyes met, and something shifted in Noah's expression. The last of his skepticism melted away, replaced by quiet admiration. "Then we'll see it through together," he said. "I've got contacts in federal law enforcement who can't be bought. We'll build the case carefully, make it bulletproof." Later that night, reviewing their surveillance footage, Leanne noticed Noah watching her instead of the screen. "What?" she asked. "Just thinking I was wrong earlier, about the bad guys always winning." He smiled slightly. "Sometimes they run into someone too stubborn to let them." Ash padded over and settled between them, his head resting on Leanne's foot. She reached down to scratch his ears, feeling the trust he now showed so freely. Every day, his recovery reminded her why this fight mattered. They had the evidence, they had each other. Now they just had to stay alive long enough to use it. The break-in happened just after midnight. Leanne jolted awake to her phone's shrill ring. The clinic's security system had been triggered. Her heart pounding, she threw on clothes and raced to her truck. The 10-minute drive felt endless. As she pulled up to the clinic, she saw the back door hanging off its hinges. Inside, drawers were pulled out, papers scattered everywhere. But one thing stopped her cold. Ash's kennel was empty. "No, no, no," she whispered, searching every room. But Ash was gone. She called the police with trembling hands. 2 officers arrived, looking bored as they took notes. Their questions felt oddly focused on her rather than the break-in. "And you've been housing an undocumented animal here?" one asked, his pen hovering. "He was injured. I was saving his life," Leanne explained. "Ma'am, you know that's against state regulations." Dawn was breaking when she finally got home. She hadn't slept, couldn't eat. Her phone buzzed with a text from Noah. "Turn on Channel 6 News." There on screen was Councilman Grant Bourne, looking concerned in his perfectly pressed suit. "It's unfortunate that radical activists would spread such harmful lies about our community," he was saying. "These allegations of animal abuse are completely unfounded. We've always supported legitimate animal welfare organizations." Leanne's doorbell rang. 2 police officers stood outside, different ones from last night. "Dr. Leanne Rowe, you're under arrest for operating an illegal animal facility and practicing veterinary medicine without proper documentation." They led her out in handcuffs. Neighbors peeked through curtains. Someone was taking pictures with their phone. Leanne held her head high, but inside she was crumbling. At the station, they took her fingerprints and mugshot. Her phone and personal items were confiscated. The holding cell was cold and smelled of bleach. "You have a visitor," a guard announced after several hours. Councilman Bourne walked in, his expensive shoes clicking on the concrete floor. He sat across from her, straightening his tie. "Dr. Rowe," he said smoothly, "such an unfortunate situation. Though I suppose you're familiar with scandal, aren't you, after what happened in Atlanta?" Leanne's blood ran cold. She hadn't told anyone about Atlanta. "Thomas Barrett was his name, wasn't he? Your fiancé?" Bourne's smile never reached his eyes. "Tragic. What happened to him? A promising career cut short. All because he couldn't mind his own business." "Is that a threat?" Leanne's voice was steady, despite her racing heart. "Just a friendly reminder that some stones are better left unturned." He leaned forward. "Drop this misguided crusade now, and perhaps we can sort out these unfortunate charges. Continue, and well..." He shrugged. "Lightning has been known to strike twice." He stood, adjusting his cuffs. "Think it over, Doctor. You have more to lose than you know." After he left, Leanne pressed her forehead against the cold cell wall. She thought of Ash, scared and alone again, of Thomas, who had died trying to expose the truth, of her clinic, her reputation, everything she'd rebuilt here in Pine Hollow. The local news was playing on a small TV in the corridor. She could hear her own name being mentioned, along with words like investigation and violations. Everything she'd worked for was being torn apart in public. A guard appeared. "Your lawyer's here." Noah had sent a defense attorney he trusted. She explained the charges were flimsy but well-crafted. "They've seized your clinic's records and computers. They're painting you as a radical running an illegal operation." "What about Ash?" Leanne asked. "No proof he was stolen. According to the paperwork they're showing, he was legally removed from an unauthorized facility." Leanne closed her eyes. They had thought this through, covered every angle, just like in Atlanta. The attorney managed to get bail set, though it was unusually high. Noah paid it without hesitation. "We knew they'd fight back," he said as they left the station. "But we didn't expect this level of coordination." "He knows about Thomas," Leanne said quietly, "about what happened in Atlanta." Noah's expression hardened. "Then he knows what happens when good people stay silent." He squeezed her shoulder. We've got copies of everything. The surveillance footage, the medical records. They can't erase it all. But Leanne barely heard him. All she could think about was Ash, wondering if he thought she had abandoned him, if he was being hurt again, if she'd failed him just like she'd failed Thomas. The weight of public shame, the loss of Ash, and Bourne's threats pressed down on her. For the first time since starting this fight, she wondered if she had the strength to continue. Noah worked his connections tirelessly through the afternoon, finally securing Leanne's release on bail. The amount was steep, $50,000, but he had friends who still owed him favors from his police days. As they walked out of the detention center, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. Leanne's hands were still shaking, but her eyes held a steely determination that Noah recognized. It was the same look she'd had when she first showed him the evidence of abuse at the Bourne estate. "They think they've won," she said quietly as they reached his truck. "That this will make me back down." Noah studied her face. "Will it?" "No." She turned to face him fully. "They took Ash to hurt me, to silence me, just like..." She swallowed hard. "Just like they silenced Thomas. I won't let them get away with it again." They drove to a small diner on the outskirts of town, where Noah had a booth in the back that couldn't be seen from the windows. Over coffee and untouched plates of food, they began to plan. "I've got a friend," Noah said, keeping his voice low. "Used to work cybersecurity before retiring. He says the Bourne Estate's surveillance system is top of the line, but it has weaknesses. If we can get access, we could download everything, not just the kennels, but the whole operation." Leanne leaned forward. "How long would it take?" "A day, maybe 2. But once we're in, we'll have it all. Timestamps, locations, faces, everything they've tried to hide." They spent hours going over the details, mapping out every possibility. It was nearly midnight when Noah dropped Leanne at her house. The porch light cast long shadows across her front yard. "I'll start making calls tomorrow," Noah said. "We'll need..." A sound cut through the night, a weak, pitiful whimper. Leanne froze. "Ash?" There, on her front porch, lay a small, crumpled form. Leanne ran forward, Noah close behind. Ash was barely breathing, his fur matted with blood and worse. But what made Leanne's blood run cold was the message burned into his skin. "Final warning!" "Oh God," she choked out, gathering the puppy carefully in her arms. He was so cold. "Noah, help me get him inside. I need my medical bag." They worked frantically for the next 2 hours. Ash had been beaten, burned, and left for dead, again. But this time, the cruelty was calculated, meant to send a message. Every injury was precise, designed to cause maximum pain without killing. Finally, Ash stabilized. Leanne sat back, her hands covered in blood, her scrubs ruined. She hadn't cried, not when they'd arrested her, not when Bourne had threatened her, not even when she'd found Ash. But now, watching the gentle rise and fall of his bandaged chest, something broke inside her. "They did this because of me," she whispered, "because I wouldn't stay quiet." Noah knelt beside her. "Number they did this because they're monsters who thought they could scare you into submission. They did this because they're afraid of what you might expose." Leanne reached out, gently touching Ash's paw. The puppy stirred slightly, his tail giving the faintest wag of recognition. Even after everything, he still trusted her. "I want it all public," she said, her voice hardening. "Every photo, every medical record, every piece of evidence we've gathered. I want the surveillance footage from the estate broadcast everywhere. I want everyone to see exactly what kind of man Grant Bourne is." "It'll be dangerous," Noah warned. "Once we start, there's no going back." "I'm done hiding." Leanne stood, wiping her hands on her ruined scrubs. "I ran after Thomas died. I convinced myself I was being smart, being safe. But look what that got us. More victims, more suffering, more silence." She looked down at Ash, at the cruel message burned into his skin. No more warnings, no more threats. We end this now. Noah nodded slowly. I'll call my contact about the surveillance system. We'll need a secure place to work from, somewhere they won't expect. Use my house, Leanne said. They've already searched the clinic and they'll be watching it, but they won't expect us to operate right under their noses. She turned back to Ash, checking his vital signs again. The puppy's breathing was stronger now, more regular. He'd survive. He was a fighter, just like her. Tomorrow, she said, not taking her eyes off Ash. We start taking them down. All of them. Noah touched her shoulder gently. Get some rest. I'll stay and keep watch. But Leanne shook her head. I need to monitor Ash through the night, and... She met Noah's eyes. I need to write everything down, every detail, every connection, everything that links back to Atlanta. If we're going public, we're going to tell the whole story. She settled into the chair next to Ash's makeshift bed, her laptop open, fingers poised over the keyboard. The truth had cost Thomas his life. It had nearly cost Ash his, twice. But this time, the truth would set them all free. The town hall gleamed under strings of twinkling lights, transformed for Pine Hollow's annual charity gala. Inside, the wealthy and powerful mingled in their finest attire, champagne glasses clinking as they celebrated their own generosity. At the center of it all stood Councilman Grant Bourne, commanding attention in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. Outside, hidden in the shadows of Noah's surveillance van, Leanne watched the security feed from the Bourne estate on multiple screens. Her heart raced as she guided their small team through wireless earpieces. They had one shot at this. Team 1 in position, crackled a voice through the speakers. Security cameras looped. Noah's friend Marcus, the former cybersecurity expert, typed furiously at his keyboard. Firewalls down. You've got 15 minutes before the system resets. Leanne pressed her hand to her earpiece. Team 2, go. On the screens, she watched as two figures in maintenance uniforms slipped through the estate's side gate. They moved with practiced efficiency, using the security codes Noah had obtained through his old police contacts. The kennels were their primary target. Inside the gala, Bourne stepped up to the podium, his voice carrying through the live feed they'd tapped into. Ladies and gentlemen, it brings me great joy to announce that this year's fundraiser has broken all previous records. We're in, Team 2 reported. My God, you need to see this. The footage began streaming to their van. Leanne's stomach turned as images filled the screens. Dozens of dogs in terrible condition, fighting rings, training equipment designed to create aggression, medical supplies for illegal breeding operations. Everything was exactly where their intelligence had indicated, but seeing it in high definition made it horrifyingly real. Time? Leanne asked, her voice tight. 8 minutes, Marcus answered, still typing. Downloading everything to secure servers now. In the gala, Bourne continued his speech, praising Pine Hollow's commitment to community values. The irony made Leanne's blood boil. Team 2, get those close-ups of the medical records, she instructed. We need proof of dates and ownership. The next 5 minutes felt like hours as they gathered their evidence. Finally, Marcus gave them the signal. Files secured. Ready for broadcast. Leanne took a deep breath. Do it. Inside the gala, Bourne's voice cut off mid-sentence as every screen in the building switched to live footage from his estate. The elegant crowd gasped as images of abuse and cruelty filled the displays. The sound system, hijacked by Marcus's programming, played the clear audio of handlers discussing fight schedules and breeding plans. Through their video feed, Leanne watched Bourne's face drain of color. He lunged for the podium microphone, but his words were drowned out by the damning evidence playing on every screen. Sending to all major news outlets now, Marcus announced, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Social media platforms too, it's going viral. Within minutes, Phones throughout the gala began buzzing with notifications. The footage was spreading across the internet like wildfire, accompanied by detailed documentation of dates, locations, and connections to Bourne's business empire. State police are already responding to calls, Noah reported, checking his phone. FBI, too. Looks like some of those dogs were transported across state lines. That makes it federal. Leanne watched as Bourne fled the podium, his security team rushing him toward the exit. But it was too late. The truth was out, spreading faster than he could contain it. Hours later, as dawn broke over Pine Hollow, Leanne sat in her clinic with Ash curled in her lap. The puppy's wounds were healing, and he seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere. His tail wagged as they watched the morning news together. Breaking news from Pine Hollow, Georgia, the anchor announced. Local politician Grant Bourne is under investigation following explosive revelations of an illegal animal fighting and breeding operation run from his private estate. State and federal authorities have seized evidence and are coordinating with animal welfare organizations. Multiple arrests have already been made. Noah entered, carrying coffee and looking exhausted but satisfied. Just got word from my contact at the state police. They found Riley Bourne. He's alive. Turns out he was the one who first discovered what his father was doing. They'd been keeping him isolated at a family property to keep him quiet. The missing farmhand? Leanne asked. Denny Cauldron's agreed to testify. Apparently, he has videos going back years. He was gathering evidence too, but was too scared to come forward alone. Leanne stroked Ash's head, feeling the rough patches where his fur was growing back over the burned warnings. It doesn't feel real yet. It's real, Noah assured her, sitting beside them. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit is involved now too. They're following the money. Bourne's empire is crumbling. On the television, footage showed animal rescue vehicles arriving at the Bourne estate. Volunteers were already coordinating to help rehabilitate the rescued dogs. We did it, Leanne whispered, more to herself than to Noah. We actually did it. For the first time since finding Ash on her doorstep that first night, she felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. Real, solid hope that justice wasn't just a dream, but something you could fight for and win. The morning headlines hit like a physical blow. Leanne's hands trembled as she read the news on her phone. Riley Bourne, 17, found dead in family estate. The article detailed how the teenager's body had been discovered in his bedroom, an empty bottle of pills beside him. She sat heavily in her clinic's office chair, Ash whimpering at her feet. Just yesterday, they'd been celebrating the exposure of Bourne's criminal empire. Now this. The television in the waiting room carried Councilman Bourne's press conference live. Gone was his usual polished appearance. Instead, he stood before the cameras looking haggard, his eyes red-rimmed. My son. His voice cracked with emotion. My beautiful boy couldn't bear the shame these false accusations brought to our family. These radical activists, in their zealous pursuit of attention, destroyed not just our reputation, but my child's will to live. Leanne felt sick. She knew it wasn't true. Riley had been ready to testify. He'd been safe in protective custody. How had this happened? Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from reporters seeking comment. The local news had already branded her the veterinarian vigilante whose reckless crusade had led to tragedy. Social media exploded with hate messages, calling her a murderer. Noah arrived at the clinic, looking grim. It doesn't add up, he said, pacing the examination room. Riley was excited about testifying. He wanted his father stopped. This makes no sense. Unless it wasn't suicide, Leanne whispered, voicing what they both suspected. We can't prove that, Noah warned. And right now the whole town is turning against us. He was right. Throughout the day, clients called to cancel appointments. People crossed the street to avoid her when she stepped outside. The local paper ran an editorial questioning her medical license and suggesting she'd fabricated evidence against an upstanding citizen. That evening, Leanne worked late, finding comfort in caring for her remaining patients. Most were rescues she'd taken in over the years, animals no one else wanted. Ash stayed close, his presence a reminder of why she'd started this fight. The first sign of smoke came just before midnight. Leanne was finishing her paperwork when Ash began barking frantically. She smelled it then, burning wood and plastic. Orange flames were already climbing the clinic's back wall. "No, no, no!" She rushed to the kennels, throwing open cages. "Out! Everyone out!" Smoke filled the air as she herded cats and dogs toward the exit. Some were too sick to move quickly. She carried as many as she could, choking on the thick black clouds. The heat became unbearable. Ash refused to leave her side as she made trip after trip into the burning building. But there were too many animals, and the fire spread too fast. When the roof began to collapse, Noah appeared out of nowhere and physically dragged her away. "You can't go back in!" he shouted, holding her as she fought him. "You'll die!" They watched helplessly as the flames consumed everything. Fire trucks arrived, but it was too late. The clinic, her life's work, became a roaring inferno. The screams of trapped animals would haunt her forever. By dawn, nothing remained but smoking ruins. The fire marshal's preliminary report called it arson, but everyone knew there would be no real investigation. Not in Pine Hollow. Not anymore. Leanne sat on the curb, covered in soot, Ash pressed against her leg. Of the 38 animals in her care, she'd only managed to save 11. The others, she couldn't bear to think about it. A news van pulled up, and a reporter approached with a microphone. "Dr. Rowe, how do you respond to accusations that your campaign against Councilman Bourne led to his son's death? Do you feel responsible?" Noah stepped between them. "Leave, now." But the damage was done. More reporters arrived. The story spread. Social media exploded with photos of the grieving Bourne juxtaposed with Leanne's radical animal rights agenda. Her professional reputation, carefully built over years, crumbled in hours. Late that afternoon, she received a text from an unknown number. "You should have minded your own business. Their blood is on your hands." Ash nudged her hand, his eyes full of trust she no longer felt she deserved. She'd tried to save him, to save them all, and instead she'd lost everything. The truth about Riley's death would likely never come out. Bourne had won, turning her victory into ashes as completely as he'd turned her clinic to ruins. "What do we do now?" she asked Noah, her voice hollow. He had no answer. They sat together in the gathering darkness, watching as curious townspeople drove past slowly, some taking pictures of the destruction, others shouting insults from their cars. Leanne stroked Ash's head, feeling more alone than she had in years. The puppy who had started it all was alive, but at what cost? She'd lost her clinic, her reputation, her place in the community. Worst of all, a 17-year-old boy was dead. Murdered, she was certain. And she felt responsible. The truth hadn't been enough. Justice had slipped away like smoke in the wind, leaving behind only devastation and guilt. Leanne sat in her small motel room, staring at her laptop screen. Ash dozed beside her on the worn bedspread, while Noah paced near the window. After 3 days of hiding from reporters and watching her reputation crumble, she'd made a decision. "I'm going to tell them everything," she said, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "About Atlanta, about Marcus. All of it." Noah stopped pacing. "Are you sure?" "Once it's out there." "I have nothing left to lose." Leanne opened her email and began typing. "And maybe someone needs to show this town what real courage looks like." She wrote through the night, pouring out the story she'd kept buried for so long. How her fiancé, Marcus Chen, had discovered that Palmer Pharmaceuticals was covering up deadly side effects in their new veterinary medications. How he'd gathered evidence, planning to expose it all. How she'd found him in their apartment, made to look like a suicide. Just like Riley Bourne. By morning, her letter was in every major news outlet's inbox. The story broke like a thunderstorm. Atlanta whistleblower murder connected to Pine Hollow scandal ran across television screens. Reporters descended on the town again, but this time they weren't looking for a villain. They were looking for a survivor. Leanne agreed to one interview with a national morning show. She sat in their studio, Ash at her feet, and spoke directly to the cameras. 5 years ago, I watched the man I loved die for telling the truth, she said, her voice clear and unwavering. I ran away, I hid. But when this puppy crawled to my door, barely alive, I knew I couldn't hide anymore. Because evil doesn't stop when we look away. It grows stronger. Social media exploded with support. Justice for Leanne began trending. Animal welfare organizations across the country pledged legal support and funding. Former Palmer Pharmaceuticals employees came forward with collaborative evidence about Marcus's murder. But the real turning point came 3 days later. Noah called an emergency press conference on the steps of Pine Hollow's courthouse. Hundreds gathered, including news crews from across the state. He held up a small digital recorder. On the night Dr. Rowe was arrested, he announced, Councilman Bourne visited her in jail. He thought nobody was recording. He was wrong. The crowd fell silent as Bourne's voice filled the air. You should have learned from your dead fiancé, Doctor. Rowe, some truths get people killed. Back off now, or history might repeat itself. Gasps rippled through the audience, phones raised to capture every moment. Noah wasn't finished. I've spent the last 3 months investigating Grant Bourne, he continued. I've uncovered a network of illegal breeding operations, dogfighting rings, and money laundering that spans 3 states. And now, evidence suggesting he orchestrated both Marcus Chen's murder and his own son's death. The tide turned so fast it left the town reeling. Former supporters of Bourne began speaking out. His estate was raided by federal agents. Old cases were reopened, including Marcus's death. Leanne watched it unfold from the small animal shelter that had taken in her surviving patients. Donations poured in from across the country. Architects offered to design a new, larger clinic. Veterinarians volunteered their services. But more importantly, people began to listen. They heard her story of loss and redemption, of courage and persistence. They saw in her what she'd seen in Ash, a survivor who refused to give up. Your fiancé would be proud, Noah told her one evening as they sorted through offers of help. You finished what he started. Leanne looked down at Ash, now healthy enough to play with the other rescued dogs. I just hope Riley's death wasn't in vain. He tried to do the right thing too. It wasn't, Noah assured her, showing her his phone. Breaking news showed Bourne being led from his office in handcuffs. The evidence was mounting, and his empire was crumbling. Local families began arriving at the shelter, not just to adopt animals, but to apologize. They brought food, offered help, shared their own stories of Bourne's intimidation over the years. We should have stood with you sooner, Mrs. Patterson, a longtime client, said tearfully. We were all just so scared. Leanne understood fear. She'd lived with it for 5 years. But now, watching her community come together, seeing justice finally taking shape, she felt something stronger than fear. Hope. She picked up a local newspaper. Her story filled the front page, but it wasn't about scandal anymore. The headline read, Local vet's courage exposes years of corruption, inspires national change. Ash barked happily, chasing a tennis ball across the shelter floor. His scars were still visible, but they didn't define him anymore. Like Leanne, he'd found his strength in survival. The Pine Hollow courthouse buzzed with tension as people packed the wooden benches. Journalists lined the back wall, their cameras ready. Leanne sat in the front row beside Noah, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Ash lay quietly at her feet, his presence a steady comfort. Judge Martha Wilson called the court to order, her gavel echoing through the suddenly silent room. In the matter of the state versus Grant Bourne, We will now hear the prosecution's key evidence. District Attorney Sarah Chen, Marcus's sister, who had specifically requested to prosecute this case, stood with quiet authority. Your Honor, the state would like to present audio evidence of direct threats made by the defendant against Dr. Leanne Rowe. Bourne sat at the defense table, his usual polished appearance showing cracks. His tie hung slightly crooked, and his face had lost its practiced charm. He stared straight ahead as the recording began to play. His voice filled the courtroom, every threatening word crystal clear. You should have learned from your dead fiancé, Dr. Rowe. Some truths get people killed. Back off now, or history might repeat itself. Gasps rippled through the audience. Judge Wilson had to bang her gavel twice to restore order. Leanne felt Noah's hand slip into hers, offering silent support. The district attorney's voice cut through the murmurs. This recording, combined with the extensive evidence of animal cruelty, illegal breeding operations, and money laundering across 3 states, presents a clear pattern of criminal behavior. Furthermore, new evidence suggests Mr. Bourne's involvement in both the murder of Marcus Chen and the death of his own son, Riley Bourne. For the next 2 hours, the prosecution laid out their case. Financial records showed millions in illegal gambling. Veterinary records proved systematic abuse. Former employees testified about the horrors they'd witnessed. Through it all, Bourne's facade crumbled piece by piece. When Judge Wilson announced the formal indictment on 37 criminal counts, including 2 charges of first-degree murder, Leanne finally allowed herself to breathe. Years of carried grief began to lift from her shoulders. After the hearing, on the courthouse steps, District Attorney Chen approached Leanne with papers in hand. The judge has granted your petition for legal custody of Ash, she said, her eyes soft with understanding. Marcus would be proud of what you've done here. Leanne knelt to hug Ash, who wagged his tail and licked her cheek. He's been mine since the moment he crawled to my door, she said. Now it's just official. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Support poured in from across the country. The American Veterinary Association awarded Leanne a grant to rebuild her clinic. Local contractors offered their services at cost. Even her former critics in town stepped forward to help, determined to make amends. Noah proved invaluable during the reconstruction, overseeing security systems and coordinating volunteers. One evening, as they reviewed building plans in her temporary office at the shelter, he cleared his throat nervously. I've been thinking, he said, running a hand through his scruffy hair. This town needs someone watching out for its animals, and you could use a partner who knows investigation and security. Leanne looked up from the blueprints, her heart quickening. Are you offering to stay? I'm offering more than that, he said quietly. I'm offering to stay with you, if you'll have me. Their first kiss tasted of coffee and promise, witnessed only by Ash, who barked his apparent approval. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Leanne stood in the open field behind her newly rebuilt clinic. The building gleamed white in the Georgia sunshine, twice the size of her old practice, with modern equipment and a dedicated rescue wing. She watched as Ash raced through the tall grass, his powerful legs carrying him in joyful circles. The scars from his abuse were still visible in his fur, but they didn't slow him down. Other rescued dogs played nearby, survivors like him, given a second chance. Noah came up beside her, slipping an arm around her waist. Look at him go, he said proudly. Hard to believe he was ever that broken puppy on your doorstep. He just needed someone to believe in him, Leanne replied, leaning into Noah's embrace. We all did. Ash bounded back to them, dropping a well-loved tennis ball at their feet. His tail wagged as he looked up at them with bright, trusting eyes that had once reminded Leanne of everything she'd lost, but now showed her everything she'd gained. The new clinic's sign caught the morning light. Second Chance Animal Hospital, where hope heals. Below it, smaller letters read, Doctor. Leanne Rowe and Noah Trevors, partners. Ash barked once, impatient for another throw. As Leanne tossed the ball across the field, watching him race after it with pure joy, she knew she'd found more than justice. She'd found her way home. Thanks for taking a moment to feel with me. If this story reminded you of what matters, hit subscribe. I'll be here tomorrow, continuing our story.